still within the transport side of things, we still have to talk about something that affects them, because the vehicles are fueled. In fact, the worrying effect of the fuel filled with high levels of sulfur is still with us, and now the calls for greater action has been cranked up a notch higher. The Chamber of Petroleum Consumers Ghana has begun gathering signatures and demanding that the Petroleum Ministry and the National Petroleum Authority address the problem. Before we get into the details of this petition, let's quickly remind ourselves of the effects of the dirty diesel.
Says that I have an attack, he will just run and look for my pump and bring it to me, put it on me, because that time I cannot do anything. Then press it, I will inhale for some time, then he will put it again and then press it again, and he will ask me, "Mommy, are you okay?" Then I'll tell him, yes, I'm okay. If I'm not okay, I can't talk, so he will see that still I'm not okay. So he will continue giving me the pump, pressing it till I will answer him, "Junior, I'm okay." Then he stops before he will go and call somebody that mommy is sick. Aja.
The sulfur element in petrol is combusted in the exhaust fumes and gets into the atmosphere. In the atmosphere, it reacts with oxygen to form sulfur dioxide. Now, these are the two main effects. First of all, the sulfur dioxide gets inhaled into the lungs. People who have a high concentration of sulfur dioxide in their lungs have a reduced immunity, which predisposes them to all sorts of respiratory infections, ranging from pneumonia to bronchitis.
What I'll say to any company that tries to maximize their profits whilst trying to increase the burden of illness in any country is that it is criminal to do that. What it means is you are killing people.
effect of air pollution on human health is very, very important in Ghana, especially in recent years. There has been several cases of non-communicable diseases in the hospitals. The human cost, the hospital cost, the problems it brings to society, and poverty level. By doing all these things, we can just, to some extent, reduce poverty. Reducing the levels of sulfur in our fuels, we can save a lot of life.
Well, I've also heard that most of these oils that we use in Ghana here are not properly done at overseas. But the question is, as in Ghana here, we cannot be part of it, and we cannot do it. So we normally depend on the foreign fuels and other things that they bring to Ghana here, and that's what we use. We have no option. That is the only thing that we can also use. Yes.
I don't think it will affect the baby. I have to get healthy, I have to get strong to use my breathing to push the baby. So if I have an attack, I don't think I can push the baby.
Yeah, so that's a quick documentary to remind us about the effects of what we're seeing today, the toxic fuel we're seeing in the country today. Well, joining us in the studio for some discussion on this is Mr. Duncan Amwa, who is the head of the Chamber of Petroleum Consumers Ghana. He's to my immediate left. Thank you for coming today. Also joining us is Sanya Hossi. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors. We'll also be joined at some point in this conversation by Angelina Mensah. She's with the Environmental Protection Agency. And we'll bring you some more as the conversation continues. But let me start with you, Mr. Hossi. We've already heard your thoughts on this issue. You're saying that it's about how much we can pay for the kind of quality we require in terms of fuel. You still stand by that position?
Well, before I address that, I'd like to make a comment on the discussion prior to this. I think the drivers have a case in using the high occupancy lanes or the BRT lanes as well, because they have high occupancy vehicles as well. The competition is good, but I think that it's only fair that we ensure that a competition provides an equal competing platform for everybody, and that's something that the state should favorably consider. Having said that, on the subject matter, I think that the core of what I have said all this while is that we have the specifications that we have and the quality of products on the market, largely because of the specifications defined by the state and the Standards Authority.
So what's the standard as defined by the Standards Authority?
It's 3,000 ppm. ppm stands for parts per million, all right, and that's the sulfur content that you have.
3,000.
3,000.
You think it's fair as
I don't think
test
so.
Level for us as a country?
Not at all. But those are not decisions taken by us as operators. We have to work within the law. And currently, BDCs supply 2,000 thereabouts. In some cases, 1,000. As a matter of fact, we have supplied the European spec to this market before, and rather had more troubles for supplying the superior spec.
Why?
You know, well, the Standards Authority at some point was of the opinion that it was either too spec or it was off spec because it was not within the normal range that they were.
So what, there were sanctions for it?
There was a lot of back and forth, but it took a longer time for them to come around.
At the time, what was the reasoning for
importantly,
it? At the time, what was the reasoning for
what?
For giving us a much lower ppm.
You know, we trade with international players. It depends on what products they have. All that we tell them is to make sure that their spec falls within a Ghana spec. So if they have 50 ppm, it fits within a Ghana specification as well. It's just that it's more superior than the worst case scenario in our specification. You know, but I think the markets have been new to it, and the reaction to market, both from the Standards Authority and OMCs at the time, was a bit uncomfortable. In a nutshell, why would you really push too hard trying to give something that's of superior quality and struggle with those who actually have to define the specification? But these things have to be addressed. It's my view, and I think the view of our membership, that we should definitely improve our standards. We cannot just change our standards overnight, and we can't get everybody to necessarily comply because of the infrastructure and logistical challenges we have, because we share common infrastructure. If I bring European spec and you bring probably the 3000 Ghana spec, all right, we all end up in the same tank. Everything gets mixed up, and I will never get value for what I have procured. And it may come at some premium. We are still working out a lot more details, because over the weekend, try to engage a lot more trade to see how we could work things out and make sure the cost implication of us moving to a 50 ppm, which I would strongly recommend, because Ghanaians definitely deserve better, all right, will not have any negative impact on the consumer in terms of price. The MPA has, the Honorable Asaga has been on my neck, I mean, really this weekend, to see how we can work it out. And we work around the clock to see if we could probably take something off here, take something off there, because these products are not produced in Europe that way. So you have to have them blended elsewhere. You know, blending happens in Europe, but different specifications are blended. Okay. So when you have to do it, is it possible for us to save the blending cost and cover the logistical premium we will now have? Because the real problem with moving to a superior spec is not the cost of the product. It's almost negligible. The real problem you have is in the infrastructure. Because when cargo moves to the West Africa, it moves with cargo too from Nigeria and other countries. So it makes the cost of logistics quite lower because of economies of scale. If you lose that, it means that you have to bring cargo just for Ghana, because Ghana's spec is different significantly from everybody. So what would be that cost?
So in all of this, here's the point. You've already explained to us what the ramifications would be in terms of changing it to the European level of specs. When you say
which I really support. I think we should go that way.
Okay.
I mean, something we've been engaging the MPA on, and honestly, the MPA and under Moses Asaga's regime, for instance, he's been quite bullish about the idea of improving our specification. He moved it from 5,000 to 3,000. At the time, they wanted to actually do 1,000, but Nigeria had issues, and that within that time we had a regulated regime. Now we don't, so it's much easier for us to move to a superior spec if the Standards Authority would cooperate with the NPA on that.
Okay, Mr. Nakanamwa, you've had cause to raise some concerns about this. In fact, you're going around getting signatories for a petition. What do you seek to achieve with this petition?
Just to add a little to what my brother said, we deserve a lot better than we're actually being served currently. And indeed, some of the tapes that you played may be slightly exaggerated, but even if they are nominal, effects, we can still reduce it. Why would the Europeans, why would the Asians, why would the Americans want to gravitate towards 10 ppm, and for some reason some are even doing ultra low sulfur today, you know. Unfortunately, we are still talking of 3,000. A little interaction we had with the NPA not too long ago points to a direction that they are committed to ensuring we come way down, but we're also not encouraged with the fact that they talk of something around 1,000 ppm. At a time when clearly the rest of the world is moving or gravitating towards single digits or at most a double digits, we are still looking at, you know, the third digits or the fourth digits sort of numbers as far as sulfur is concerned. The effect on all of us, I'm quite certain that even if it was the issue of cost to quality, most Ghanaians would prefer to have the kind of quality that would actually, assure them that my engine could run for a minimum 10 years as happens elsewhere in Europe. If you bring most of these cars in from Europe, you would realize some have done over 20 years, sometimes 15 years. But the engines are still sound because they are getting the kind of fuels that they need to run those automobiles. Unfortunately, we seem to go back and forth with all of this. We believe that it is an issue of policy, it is an issue that the government together with the EPA and other major stakeholders would have to address, and immediately. As a matter of fact, if the government could come up with a roadmap to all of us, especially consumers in Ghana, and tell us today, that indeed we have so much in store, in stock. So let us try and get rid of those products. But from this date, we are not allowing anything beyond 550, 10. Then we can all go back to sleep and say, indeed, something has been done. But if there's the foot dragging and the usual excuse, and that indeed if we have to move, it will cost us a little more, we are not ready, the EPA assessment would have to be carried out, our pollution levels would have to be assessed. Clearly, even if it is one, right? If it is one human life that will be challenged, we think it is not worth it.
Okay.
If it is one engine that would go bad because of high sulfur content product, we think it is not worth it.
Fixed. But the thing is this, you've already indicated that you've begun soliciting for signatures for your petition.
Yes.
What is it supposed to do?
Indeed, the public cannot be happy about this. And if you speak to some of the motoring public, you would see some anxiety, some anger. Some are really asking questions. Is this what it really has been all along? Are we going to change? Are we going to see a change? So to give the public the chance to also be able to express that frustration in a decent, dignifying manner, we would set ourselves up to do all of that. But even in doing so, you would recognize that there are notable organizations or bodies. The AGI is one, the GPRTU is another, right? If you are able to get their commitment, what it means is that once you have AGI, industry is committed. Once you have GPRTU, transport owners are also committed. Once you have ICU, those working in industries, right, they are also committed. So we would look at the various blocks, you know, as well, and also deal with them. Once they put their voices to the issues, I'm not quite sure any government or any policy maker would be comfortable in insisting that where we have gotten to, we need to move towards 1,000 when Kenya and the rest are able 50. To do 50. Okay. And our importers have given us every assurance that if the policy is worked on, they could do, I mean, the standards that we require of them. I don't see the need to even have these excuses coming from
and some it's good you mentioned the issue of standards, because those who actually set it and ensure that they are done is the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Standards Authority. But let me just repick the thoughts of Madam Angelina Mensah. She's with the EPA, joining us online. Thank you, Madam, for joining us. We know that you do the emission test levels. Just for clarity, what's the required ppm as set out for the test you do?
Please, I can't hear you. Your line is very bad. But good afternoon, and good afternoon to your panelists and then your listeners. But I can't hear you. You're not very clear.
Okay, let me raise my voice and hope that you would this time. I'm asking about the emission test that you do. What level is the required for emissions from vehicles, especially with the fuel issue that we're hearing of today?
Okay, the levels that are being used is we're looking at the WHO standards. We are now putting standards and guidelines in place. A committee has been set and they've already finalized their work. And so normally we use the WHO permitting levels. But I must add that for some years now, our environmental quality department, the monitoring they've been conducting, it shows that we are above the permissible levels. And that includes dust and other particulate matters.
What is the WHO level that you speak of, madam?
I can't remember right now, but I think it's about below PM10, particulate matter 10 is below that.
Below 10?
Yep.
10 ppm?
Particulate matter.
PM. That's different from
the ppm. Okay, but with what you say now per the test you do, you say it's a bit higher than permissible levels. Do we have the specifics?
Yes, it's very, very high. I think it's about more than 30. And this is due to dust levels and also emissions coming from vehicles.
Emissions coming from vehicles. Okay, so now that you say that this committee has been put together to do this, am I to understand then that in the past there were no checks done in this regard?
There were tests done. I mean, that is the more reason why the Environmental Protection Agency is in collaboration with the vehicle, the DVLA, to make sure that before you even get your roadworthy certificate, you should pass a certain limit of your vehicle. And so we've been doing it, but you need to back it by some law, okay? And this takes time, you need to compare with other countries' standards and what could be very permissible to Ghana. So basically, this is what we've done.
So where are we now in terms of that plan to get that
yes,
legislation?
We've finalized the guidelines, and it would be made public before the end of the year.
Okay, so with these concerns being raised now about the sulfur levels, is there anything the EPA is doing about it?
Well, I've heard about the fact that fuel that came into the country has high levels of sulfur. And coming from a scientific institution, since we have not done any test to ascertain its efficacy, I cannot offhand say anything. But I think that, as I've mentioned, the guidelines that we've put in place would lead to the implementation of national fuel quality standards. We'll also make sure that, as I mentioned, with DVLA to support the implementation of tighter vehicle emission standards, and also try to promote alternative fuels for the country. So these are some of the basic things EPA would be doing and is doing.
Okay. Now, once you say that these are the things you want to do, the specifics will help us in terms of timeline, so we can all monitor and track and see how well they are done. How soon will all this be done?
Indeed. Our collaboration is with DVLA, and they are the ones who are to set up those, workshops to make sure that the vehicles on our roads have the best of engines, have the best of exhaust pipes and all that, so that the emission levels will be very low. Okay, we are ready. The guidelines will be out by the end of the year. But then the setting up of the workshop is what DVLA has to be asked when they can do that.
So between now and the end of the year, what happens?
Between now and the end of the year, we still do our monitoring. We have various points that we have monitoring stations. I'm sorry, but my battery will be running down, so okay. I would speak very quickly.
Madam Mensah, thank you for your time. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Angelina Mensah is the head of public affairs with the EPA. So, Mr. Hossi, you've already mentioned that the MPA is asking that a lot more be done in this regard. Do we know how soon the levels will reduce?
A few things. She wasn't talking about sulfur content. Your question, I don't think, was rightly answered by her when she was talking about 10. When you're talking about particulate matter, talking about the atmospheric particulate matter, looking at all the parts, and you've used 10, you're probably talking about 10 micrometer to see how many particles really can, within the atmospheric space, out of that. So that's fine. And that is actually the largest. That's a different matter altogether. We are talking about the sulfur content in diesel. All right. And that, per the standard, stands at 3,000 parts per million, not particulate matter. So it's a different, she was probably answering a different question. You know, so we have that. Should it be at 50? I absolutely don't see why we shouldn't be at 50. As a matter of fact, in Europe, they were at 50 probably, I think, in 2004. All right, and then they've been moving, and I think the last few years they've moved to 10 ppm, and in some countries they're actually giving incentives for you to actually have no sulfur at all. You know, it comes at an extra technological.
So in all of this, who is supposed to ensure that we get this done? You're saying that for you, if the policy or the legal framework is put in place, you will comply. Is that it?
Absolutely. We are ready to supply this market with 50 ppm, with 10 ppm tomorrow morning.
Why can't you just do it without the legal framework?
Because it comes with some cost implications at our side. If you have $1, $2, $10 advantage over another person who refuses to do that, you can't compete with the person at the pump. And there are a lot of competitors. Unfortunately, I'm the only one you see as a CEO of a chamber. But you possibly have 35 BDCs in there. You have government players like Boss who are also importing the same type of product. You also have probably another 40 or so oil trading companies and then export companies. So all these products come in. Anybody who possibly doesn't align with that standard, all right, may have a competitive advantage, and you who aligns with it will get no premium for it, and you'll be out of business after your first trade. Beyond that, we all share common infrastructure. And we all put our products in the same tank. So if we don't have specs similar, how will I be able to draw down on my particular spec? That will be a problem. For products like V-Power, very few, because the consumption is not that much. You have very few depots that have dedicated tanks just for that particular kind.
So for the V-Power is what ppm?
That's petrol. We are not talking about
okay,
ppm.
That's not
so that's diesel. So we're hardly talking about the octane, the run.
Yeah.
And what we have in Ghana is even superior to some of what we have in America. Okay. For us, just to be clear, we don't really make money. We don't make any special money for complying with the Ghana standard. The only thing here is that we can definitely do the European standard, but everybody has to come on board. Once everybody comes on board, it's even possible that the net effect of the cost, because of the volume that everybody is driving to the consumer, will become zero.
Okay.
There may not be the need for it. Immediately, you may experience a 10% or so, or possibly less, because we're still looking at net offs. It's possible to net off blending down offshore to give a 2,000 ppm, because you are bringing original product, which is 5,000 ppm. And that cost can actually be transferred to actually fund the cost of the logistical challenges you would have. And the consumer may not even have to pay anything, or probably any increase will be very temporal.
Okay. Let me give the final word to you, Mr. Amwa. You've gone on this tangent of ensuring that things get done. The MPA says they are working on it. You've heard Mr. Sonyosi mention clearly that if the structure is put in place, they will comply. So will there be any relief for the petition?
In fact, it is the more reason why we would need also to push the authorities to do the necessary. From what he says, and which I agree perfectly, if you should legislate today that these are the new standards, BOST would not have any business doing 2,000 ppm if 1 BDC is, brought products that is about this, because of the in-tank and product mix. So it will be quite difficult to distinguish whose product or whose, it's quite difficult to. So we need to get to that point where either the NPA through the Ministry of Petroleum, the broader stakeholder, consultative body, agrees that where we have gotten to, we need to get to low ultra, sulfur products, such that the market would get the benefit thereof. But unfortunately, the little I know is that if we move today, tomorrow, what it means is that TOR will have to shut down because we have not been able to invest enough to bring the refinery to the level that it can also adequately
ahead of the consumer, the consumer ahead of
the
refinery.
So at this point, let us sound a notice to government. If you would need to go up there and invest in TOR to bring it to acceptable sulfur limits, please do so and don't use TOR as an excuse anymore. Because the moment we decide as a people that 3,000 is too high, 50 is okay. If TOR cannot give us 50, it means TOR would have to stop producing, diesel for all of us. If it produces, it must send to another country that probably doesn't mind, the pollutant effects of having high sulfur. So government would need also to address the TOR issues if it must to. Other than that, if TOR must go off, maybe it has to go off or stop producing those high sulfur content products, so that we can have a system that, like I said, they will give us the confidence that everything coming in from Europe now conforms to a certain minimum standard. If Europe went to 50 ppm 10, 15 years ago, what are we doing with 3,000 today?
Okay, gentlemen, I want to say thank you for coming today. Clearly, this issue is not done yet. Until we see the results.
Just for the record, I absolutely support the push by everybody to have lower sulfur, and we have launched a campaign. #Eurospec for Ghana. We equally deserve to have the same kind of thing.
That's interesting.
Anybody can follow me on my page for that.
Okay.
And let's fix it.
So let's see where this goes and where the Petroleum Ministry and the MPA will take this. In fact, head of our energy desk, Israel Lai, sat down with the Chief Executive Officer of the MPA, Moses Asaga, to get some answers on this issue and what the MPA is doing to help us all see the sulfur levels reduced to maybe 50 in the near future.
We are within the non-injurious range, but quality is something that we always strive for, no matter the level at which you are.
What is the standard for us here in Ghana?
Yes, the standard in 2005 was 10,000 ppm.
10,000 ppm is in 10,000 parts
per million. Yes.
Okay, so essentially you can say 10,000 parts of sulfur per million.
Per million. So if we take 1 million of the diesel, 10,000
of it is
so which is about 0.8 maybe 1%, thereabout.
Yeah. 1%. So,
yes, it's 1%.
Yeah.
We wanted to even go down to 2,000 ppm, but we could only make 3,000 ppm, and we are currently using 3,000 mppm. But that one is as a result of the fact that we are a subset of that big Nigerian market. And the Nigerian regulation is still accepting 3,000 ppm. So most of the refineries in Europe see Nigeria as the bigger market, almost taking about 80% of the total products. So no refinery would want to, in terms of economies of scale, would want to say that, look, because Ghana wants to aspire to 2,000 or 1,000, we should produce for the Ghana market, which is a smaller market. Because everything is based on economies of scale.
Right.
If you have a refinery, the refinery has a nameplate. The refinery could be like 200,000 barrels a day. So you are not going to configure your refinery to produce about 2,000 barrels a day because of a particular country.
Right, but let's stay with this particular issue where you're saying that essentially, so you're essentially saying that the refineries are producing with the 3,000 parts per million because for West Africa. But there in Europe, they have much lower sulfur content in their fuel, in their diesel. Why are we not buying that kind of diesel?
Yes.
Because it is produced.
Yes. The reason why we are not buying it is also a question of price. The lower the sulfur content.
Okay, but at least the refinery there is producing much lower sulfur content fuel or diesel.
Yeah, which is meant for the European market.
Which is meant for the European market.
But there are refineries
which we can buy too.
We can buy if you choose at their premium prices.
Which means that the argument for bringing or the refinery producing for the West African market doesn't really fly in this case.
It flies because Nigeria is the biggest consumer, taking 80 to 90% of the West African market.
But if we wanted to buy low sulfur content diesel, we can actually get from the refinery.
Yeah, we can get from the refinery, but at a premium.
Okay. Yeah. How much more, by the way?
Well, it could be double the price.
Is that the reason why we're not buying?
Well, because first of all, the market hasn't shown that people are interested in a 50 ppm at that very high price. Just like I was telling people another station, it's like various brands of cars. There are certain cars that are manufactured just for the US market, and they are very expensive. Then there are cars that are manufactured for the same brand, but manufactured for, let's say, third world countries. So if Mercedes is making a US market, it's of higher specs with different fittings into it. But when they are doing for third world, like India and Africa, then the specs are lowered. That doesn't mean that we are getting a very, very inferior product. It is about functionality and what price you want to.